My name is Nora Morgan, and what I'm about to share with you changed my life forever. Before I tell you about the incredible revelations Jesus showed me about what the dead are doing right now, I need you to understand that every word of this testimony is true. What happened to me wasn't just a dream or hallucination. It was more real than anything I've experienced in my earthly life. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in September when everything changed. I was driving to work, just like I had done thousands of times before. The autumn leaves were starting to turn, and I remember thinking about how I needed to rake my yard that weekend. That's the last normal thought I had before everything went black. Later, I learned that a drunk driver had run a red light and T-boned my car at 65 miles per hour. The impact was so severe that my car flipped 3 times before coming to rest on its roof. The first responders would later tell my family that they didn't expect to find anyone alive in the wreckage. They were right. Technically, I wasn't alive. I was pronounced dead at the scene. But what happened during those 27 minutes when my heart stopped beating is what I need to share with you today. What Jesus revealed to me about the activities of those who have passed on isn't just shocking. It will transform how you understand both life and death. The moment of impact, everything went dark. But then, suddenly, I was awake. More awake than I'd ever been. The pain was gone, and I felt lighter than air. I found myself floating above my crushed car, watching as paramedics worked frantically on my broken body below. I could hear every word they said with perfect clarity, even though I was at least 15 feet above them. "No pulse," one paramedic said, his voice tight with urgency. "Starting compressions." I wanted to tell them I was fine, that they didn't need to worry about me, but I couldn't speak. That's when I noticed the light. It started as a pinpoint in the distance, like a star in the night sky, but it quickly grew brighter and larger. The light was unlike anything on Earth. It was pure, warm, and filled with more love than I can possibly describe. I felt myself being drawn toward it, moving through what seemed like a tunnel of swirling colors and patterns. But this wasn't like the cliched tunnels you hear about in other near-death experiences. This tunnel was alive with purpose, and I could sense thousands of presences around me, all moving with divine intention. As I traveled through this space, I began to hear what sounded like countless voices, singing in perfect harmony. The melody was both familiar and completely new, like something I'd always known but had somehow forgotten. The music seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, suddenly, I was there. The best way I can describe there is to imagine stepping into pure light that somehow doesn't blind you. And in that light stood Jesus Christ himself. I recognized him immediately, not because he matched any painting or image I'd ever seen, but because every cell in my being knew him as my Creator and Savior. His presence was overwhelming, not in a frightening way, but in the way that standing before an ocean makes you realize how small you are, while simultaneously making you feel completely safe and at peace. His eyes held more love than I thought possible to exist, and when he smiled at me, I felt every question I'd ever had about my worth answered in an instant. "Welcome, Nora," he said, and his voice resonated through my entire being. "There is much you need to see." What happened next is what I've been instructed to share with the world. Jesus began to show me what the souls of the departed are actually doing right now, and it's nothing like what most people imagine. He gestured, and suddenly we were observing what I can only describe as a vast spiritual realm. I saw countless souls engaged in what Jesus explained was the great work of heaven. This wasn't the passive, cloud-sitting existence many imagine. Instead, I witnessed souls actively participating in God's ongoing work of redemption and creation. "Watch carefully," Jesus said, directing my attention to different scenes. "Each soul here has a divine purpose they're fulfilling." I saw groups of souls engaged in what appeared to be intercession for those still on Earth. They were somehow aware of specific struggles and challenges facing their loved ones and even strangers, and they were actively praying and working in ways that affected the physical world, though not in the way many might assume. They don't hover around their families or haunt their old homes, Jesus explained, addressing a common misconception. Their work is much more important. I witnessed souls who were helping to guide other recently departed spirits, much like spiritual mentors. Others were engaged in what appeared to be vast educational experiences, learning deeper truths about God's creation and His plans. Some were participating in what Jesus described as the preparation of the new heaven and the new earth. What struck me most was how organized and purposeful everything was. This wasn't a place of eternal rest in the sense of inactivity. It was a realm of joyful, meaningful work in service to God's kingdom. Jesus then showed me something that particularly surprised me. I saw souls who were actively participating in what He called the great chorus of creation. They were part of a vast harmony that somehow helped maintain the very fabric of reality itself. Their worship wasn't just singing, it was an essential part of how God's universe functions. Many on earth think of heaven as an ending, Jesus said, but it's actually a beginning. What you're seeing is the active participation in God's ongoing work of redemption and creation. He then showed me something that broke my heart. Souls who had recently arrived, but were having difficulty accepting their new reality because their loved ones on earth were trapped in excessive grief. "Watch," Jesus said, directing my attention to a particular scene. I saw a woman who had recently passed away. She was beautiful, radiant with heaven's light, but she kept looking back toward earth with concern. Jesus explained that her family's inability to move forward with their lives was causing her distress, even in heaven. They think they honor her memory with their endless grief, Jesus said, but they don't understand that she has important work to do here. Their refusal to accept God's timing and plan creates a kind of spiritual static that makes her transition more difficult. This was a profound revelation. Our grieving on earth, when it becomes excessive and consuming, can actually impact our loved ones' heavenly assignments. This doesn't mean we shouldn't grieve, but there's a difference between healthy mourning and the kind of grief that refuses to accept God's will. Jesus then showed me something even more shocking, how the prayers of people on earth interact with the work being done in heaven. I saw what looked like streams of light rising from earth, joining with the activities of the souls in heaven in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. Every sincere prayer, Jesus explained, becomes part of the great work being done here. Nothing is wasted, nothing is lost. He showed me how souls in heaven could see the bigger picture of God's plan in ways we on earth cannot. They understand why certain prayers are answered differently than expected, and they work to help channel God's grace in ways that serve His ultimate purposes. This is why it's so important for those on earth to understand, Jesus said. Their loved ones aren't gone, they've been promoted. They're doing essential work in my kingdom. I was then shown something that made me gasp, the actual mechanics of how heaven and earth interact. It was like seeing behind the scenes of reality itself. I watched as angels and departed souls worked in perfect harmony, carrying out God's instructions with joy and precision. What amazed me was how active and dynamic everything was. This wasn't a place of passive eternal rest. It was a realm of purpose, growth, and continuous praise. Every soul had a role, a purpose, a divine assignment that contributed to God's grand design. Jesus then showed me something that particularly concerned Him, the way some on earth were being deceived about the nature of the afterlife through various New Age teachings and false spirituality. "Many are being led astray," He said, His voice filled with compassion but also firmness. "They seek to contact the dead through forbidden means, not understanding that the souls here are engaged in my work, not waiting to be summoned by the living." He showed me how these attempts to communicate with the dead through mediums and psychics actually opened doors to deception from dark spiritual forces. The souls in heaven, he explained, communicate with the living only in ways he specifically authorizes, and always in accordance with his will and word. Tell them, Jesus instructed me, that their loved ones are not floating aimlessly in some spiritual realm. They are here, with me, engaged in work more meaningful than anything they did on earth. I was then shown how the souls in heaven maintain their individual personalities while being perfected in Christ. They don't become anonymous angels or lose their identities. Instead, they become more fully themselves than they ever were on earth, free from sin and limitation. Jesus showed me how souls in heaven are aware of time passing on earth, but experience it differently. They're not bound by earthly time constraints, yet they understand and can track earthly events when it pertains to their heavenly work. Many on earth worry that their departed loved ones are missing important events, Jesus explained. They don't understand that those here experience time from an eternal perspective. Nothing is truly missed. It's just experienced differently. I witnessed souls celebrating earthly milestones with heavenly joy, but not in the limited way we might imagine. Their participation in earthly events was always in perfect alignment with God's will and purposes. Then Jesus showed me something that deeply moved me, how the prayers and worship of people on earth create what he called windows of glory that allow heaven's reality to touch earth in special ways. I saw how these moments of genuine worship and prayer created supernatural connections between the two realms. This is why corporate worship is so important, Jesus explained. When my people gather to praise me, they create opportunities for heaven's reality to influence earth in powerful ways. He showed me how the souls in heaven sometimes participate in these moments, joining their worship with that of the church on earth in ways that strengthen the fabric of reality itself. As we continued our journey, Jesus showed me how souls in heaven participate in what he called the Great Preparation. I witnessed countless souls working on aspects of the new heaven and new earth, though much of what I saw was too magnificent for me to fully comprehend or describe in human terms. Every soul here understands their part in my plan, Jesus said. There is no confusion, no competition, no jealousy, only perfect joy in serving my purposes. I saw how different souls had different assignments, all perfectly suited to who they had become through their earthly lives and their heavenly transformation. Some were involved in what appeared to be cosmic architecture, while others seemed to be preparing welcome places for souls yet to arrive. Jesus then addressed another common misconception. Many on earth think heaven is about receiving rewards and resting, he said. While there are certainly rewards, and there is rest in me, the greatest joy here is in participating in my ongoing work of creation and redemption. He showed me how souls in heaven experience perfect fulfillment in their tasks, free from the frustration and limitation that often accompanies work on earth. Every assignment was an opportunity to express love for God and participate in his purposes. I witnessed how souls in heaven maintain perfect awareness of God's presence while carrying out their various tasks. Unlike on earth, where we can become so absorbed in our work that we forget God, these souls performed their duties in a constant state of worship and communion with him. Jesus then showed me something that particularly surprised me, how the prayers of Christians on earth for the lost create opportunities for heaven's influence to touch those souls in special ways. I saw how these prayers were like streams of light that the souls in heaven could help direct toward their intended recipients. This is why persistent prayer is so important, Jesus explained. It creates channels through which my grace can flow more freely. He showed me how the souls in heaven rejoice when someone on earth turns to Christ, and how they participate in what he called the Great Celebration whenever a lost soul is saved. As our time together continued, Jesus showed me how the souls in heaven maintain perfect balance between their individual assignments and their corporate worship. Unlike on earth, where we often struggle to balance work and worship, these souls experienced their work as worship and their worship as work. "This is what I designed humanity for," Jesus explained. "Perfect unity between purpose and praise." I witnessed how souls in heaven never experience boredom or fatigue. Their joy in their tasks never diminishes, and their ability to perceive and participate in God's purposes never wanes. Jesus then showed me something that deeply touched my heart: how the souls in heaven pray for and encourage one another in their various assignments. Though they experience no sin or limitation, they still build each other up and celebrate each other's participation in God's work. "This is perfect community," Jesus said. "What my church on earth strives for, these souls experience in its fullness." I saw how souls who had known each other on earth continued to work together in heaven, their earthly relationships transformed and perfected by God's love. But I also saw beautiful collaborations between souls who had lived in different times and places on earth. Jesus showed me how the souls in heaven have perfect understanding of how their earthly lives prepared them for their heavenly assignments. Every trial, every joy, every experience was woven into their eternal purpose in ways that displayed God's perfect wisdom. "Nothing is wasted," Jesus said. "Every moment of earthly life has eternal significance." He showed me how souls who had suffered greatly on earth now understood the divine purpose behind their trials. Their heavenly assignments often involved using that experience to help channel God's comfort to those still suffering on earth. As our time drew to a close, Jesus gave me specific instructions about sharing what I had seen. "Tell them," he said, "that their loved ones are not lost, not floating in space, not sleeping until the resurrection. They are actively engaged in my kingdom work, experiencing joy beyond human description." He emphasized that while souls in heaven are aware of earth, they view earthly events from heaven's perspective. Their concern is not for temporary earthly matters, but for the eternal consequences of earthly choices. "Tell them to live with heaven in mind," Jesus instructed. "The choices they make on earth have eternal implications. Every act of obedience, every choice to trust me, prepares them for their eternal assignment." Just before sending me back, Jesus showed me one final scene, a glimpse of the future moment when heaven and earth will be united. The glory of what I saw was beyond my ability to describe, but it filled me with an unshakable hope and purpose. "Remember," Jesus said, "what you've seen is only a small part of what I have prepared for those who love me. The greatest wonders are yet to come." With those words, I felt myself being drawn back through the tunnel of light. I was suddenly aware of intense pain and the sounds of medical equipment. I could hear voices saying, "She's back! We've got a pulse." When I opened my eyes, I was in an ambulance, surrounded by paramedics who would later tell me they had never seen anyone come back after being dead for so long. The doctors called my recovery miraculous, and it was. But the real miracle was what I had seen and learned during those 27 minutes. Since that day, my understanding of death, heaven, and the afterlife has been completely transformed. I no longer fear death, though I understand that God has left me here for a purpose, to share what I've seen and help others understand the glorious reality that awaits those who love Jesus. When people ask me if I was afraid to die, I tell them the truth. The only thing that scares me now is the thought of people living their entire lives without understanding what I've seen. Every soul on earth needs to know that heaven is not a place of passive rest, but a realm of purpose, joy, and active participation in God's ongoing work. My experience has taught me that while we should certainly grieve the loss of our loved ones, we can do so with hope, knowing they are not lost or sleeping or floating aimlessly. They are more alive than ever, engaged in work more meaningful than anything we can imagine on earth. As I share this testimony, I pray that it brings comfort to those who have lost loved ones and inspiration to those who are still seeking their purpose. Remember, every moment of your life is preparation for your eternal assignment. Live with that knowledge, and let it transform how you view both life and death. Jesus is real, heaven is real, and the work being done there is more amazing than anything we can imagine. Our loved ones aren't gone. They've simply been promoted to higher service in God's kingdom. And one day, if we remain faithful to Christ, we will join them in that glorious work. This is the truth about what the dead are doing now. They are very much alive, serving God with joy and purpose in ways that will amaze us when we finally see it for ourselves. Until then, let us live with heaven in mind, knowing that our lives on earth are preparation for the eternal purposes God has designed for each of us. Remember, Jesus said, "The greatest wonders are yet to come." Live in that hope, and let it transform everything about how you view both this life and the next.